Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And today I'm going to talk about a really amazing band, 20th Century Zoo. And they came out of Phoenix in 1967. They started as the Bittersweets and then had to change their name because there was another band by that name. And strangely enough, they got the name changed because they just asked people in the audience at one of their shows what they should change their name to, and somebody said 20th Century Zoo, which is a great name. And I know they're from Phoenix, but when I listen to it, it seems like it would have been really at home on International Artist Records out of Texas. It kind of has that feel to it, and but it was on Vault Records, and Vault Records originally started as a surf label and then became a jazz label, and then around 1968, 69, 70, they started signing a few rock acts, and one of their other rock acts at the time was a band called Floating Bridge, a heavy keyboard dominated band from right here in Seattle, and they're also quite excellent. But 20th Century Zoo put out one album, and it's called Thunder on a Clear Day, and it was released in early 1969. And it's really an impressive record. I've seen some critics just dismiss it as sort of blues rock, but there's a lot more going on to that. There's a couple tracks on that are really heavy and really wild that have been categorized as proto-punk, and also just a nod to heavy rock. And I find the stuff that's heavier on this record I would categorize as grunge. I know grunge was something that happened in the '90s here in Seattle, but this record at its best moments really kind of reminds me of something that would be called grunge. Um, it's not quite heavy, but it's really psychedelic, moving into the hard rock of the '70s, and just really brilliant. And there is a blues tune on there. Um, that is classic blues, and it's pretty great. They do a great job on blues, and there's some pretty crazy organ work on it, and there's um, harmonica and also piano. So it's loaded up with extra instruments, but it's a pretty stunning work. And I love the fact that on the record they use a lot of sound effects on the record, and that particular blues song is introduced with the sound of an orchestra tuning up, which I think is very clever. But the Bittersweets put out 3 singles, and they're very influenced by the Byrds at the time. And they ended up opening for Canned Heat and Blue Cheer and the Byrds, and they moved to L.A. and started putting out singles when they moved to L.A. on the Vault Records label. And some of them are better than others. Some of the ones that they released after the album are more keyboard dominated and a lot more pedestrian. But they also did a TV appearance in right around 1968 on local TV, and unfortunately that hasn't surfaced. But they recorded the album in 1968, which makes it all the more impressive, even though it didn't get released until early '69. The fact that they were doing a couple of these tracks that are a little heavier, we're doing that in 1968 is pretty impressive. And they worked on a second LP, but Skip Ladd, one of the guitarists, was drafted, and so they only managed to record a few songs for the next album. And a handful of those have been released on a Sundazed record label EP. So there's a lot of stuff out there, but they lineup of the band was Alan Chitwood on bass, Greg Farley on guitar, Paul Skip Ladd on guitar, Bob Sutko on vocals and harp, Randy Wells on drums, and Michael Martina on keys. And so 6 members, and even though they had a keyboardist in the band, the guitar dominates the record for the most part, except for a few points here and there. So I consider them more of a guitar band. And their twin guitar work is just so impressive. One of the things that makes the record work so well. And the album is really interesting because it opens up with what sounds like it's going to be a lilting psychedelic ballad of sorts, and then all of a sudden distorted guitar comes slicing out of it like a laser beam. And then after that, it just gets crazy. The second song on there, called Rainbow, is just an all-time classic. And there's another one on the second side called It's in My Head that are just stunning. Like I say, the twin guitar work on it is great. It doesn't really feel like a psychedelic record, even though it was recorded in 1968. And it's definitely looking forward to things to come. And I always think it's fascinating to look at the context of some of these records because, of course, by the time 20th Century Zoo's album came out in 1969, we already had Led Zeppelin on the scene and bands like that. So it's really fascinating to kind of look at a band like this existing when Led Zeppelin's out there. And it shows that there are different tiers of bands. There are bands that were just epic and great, and a band like Led Zeppelin coming out in 1969 and were so forward thinking and set huge trends for bands that came after 1969, 1970. And so 20th Century Zoo sounds a little dated in that sense, but it's great that those kind of bands existed together at the same time. And I love that whole period of 1968, 69 as well, from the move from psychedelic rock to more classic hard rock as we know it, and a lot of heavier things. And some of these bands like this that weren't nationally known, didn't chart, and are a little more primitive than some of the big bands on the major labels. But the joy of listening to stuff like this is it shows you that there's just a lot of bands out there trying, and some of them are relatively amateurish compared to the very top bands, but they got that sound, they got that feel, and you can smell the pot smoke when you listen to the record. And 20th Century Zoo is definitely an example of that. If all the material on it was as heavy and had such great dual guitar work as Rainbow and It's All in My Head, it would just be a total monster. As it is, it's still a great album, as I mentioned, and well worth the purchasing it. Of course, the album itself is pretty collectible, but there's a couple CD versions. One's a shorter version, and one includes all their other singles. And I'll post them all below, so check them out. But the extended version with all their extra singles really shows the schizophrenia of a band that started out being more Byrds-like, then released this album, which has some real great proto-punk, almost heavy stuff on it. And then the last couple singles, they turned into kind of a more pedestrian rock band with the keyboards dominating, which is kind of sad considering they had two great guitar players in the band, and at their best were truly a great American rock band. So 20th Century Zoo, it's really gone up in my favor over the years, just because the best of it is so forward-looking, and the singers, there's a lot of vocals in the band, and there tends to be some good harmonies on the singles. By the time they get the album, they have a pretty much standard rock format with the front man. He's got some pretty convincing moments. He lets out some pretty good howls and blues belting on the blues track that closes the album. And so they're a pretty convincing blues band too, and you even call it blues with a feeling. They call it a jam. And but wow, what a band! 20th Century Zoo. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.